One time.
Well, your company is Token, and you grant online banking privileges to the cannabis industry. There's a lot of agencies out there, new companies, startups, trying to figure out a solution around some of these problems that James and I were talking about. But why don't you tell me how yours works? How does Token work?
Sure. Token is unique. You're right. There are quite a few companies out there trying to solve the same problem. Solutions vary, anything from flying actual cash to the Bahamas to setting up holding companies that essentially provide banking. Most of them are at best unethical. Quite a few are quite frankly illegal. What Token does is something unique. So Token sort of capitalize on this decentralization trend, if you will, and I'll talk about it a little later and explain what that means in banking. We look at some of the cutting edge technologies that allow us to essentially streamline compliance practices and therefore really tackle regulation head on instead of going around it like a lot of companies do. We don't shy away from regulatory requirements. My background is a banking regulator with the OCC. We have individuals on our team. Almost all of us are affiliated with public service, DOD, military. We have CIA representatives, NSA, and so forth. It's a really unique team, and none of us are strangers to risk management or regulation.
And this is your team at Token, not
Token,
the
correct.
OCC.
No, correct. Token.
Wow, okay.
Absolutely. So what Token does, conceptually, it allows consumers to essentially download an application, tie a payment source to the application, be it a credit card or a bank account, walk into a participating dispensary, or business for that matter, and make a purchase. A dispensary has essentially a plug-in into their POS that recognizes that consumer. We also use what's called geofencing. We essentially set up a 30-foot radius within the dispensary, and within that radius, the application is active. So we comply with the requirement to essentially to facilitate a purchase within the confines of the authorized location.
Sure.
At that point, a consumer presses pay, they walk away, the money leaves their account, it's a debit transaction to them. The magic happens in that moment. The money leaves consumer's account, bank account, goes into a Token partner account. We use partner banks. So the actual fiat currency stays inside of the banking system. However, at that moment, we issue a token to a dispensary that represents that transaction.
For how much ever the transaction was for?
However much. Obviously, there are limits. Those transactions are typically no more than $300 a piece.
Okay.
Dispensary now has two options. It can use Token in a similar way you would use, say, PayPal. You can do a token-to-token transaction. So if you are a retailer and you want to purchase something from a grower or a MIP, you can certainly do that if a MIP is on a token system. Or you can do a traditional, what's called EFT transaction, electronic funds transfer, through a bank. So you can do an ACH, like a bill pay, or a wire to another institution. So some dispensaries, you mentioned earlier, there are a few banks that are currently offering services.
Sure.
Unfortunately, there are very few in the space. However, some dispensaries are fortunate enough to have bank accounts. So they use Token and they can transfer funds from the Token account into the existing bank account. So we're all about optionalities.
And so I think, our viewers, our listeners definitely know like Venmo. Sure. This sounds like a Venmo. Each partner, the payer and the payee, have to have this app downloaded to their phone or to their computer, and that way they can make those payments. Is it somewhat similar to that?
On the surface.
On the surface,
Absolutely.
Purely from a user interface.
Absolutely. So we looked at the space, the market, if you will, and recognized that users want safe, secure transactions that are frictionless. Users don't want to download some application that requires your social security number. However, regulators want something that's traceable and transparent. So there's a conundrum, right? You have a privacy issue and you have regulatory requirements. And what Token does essentially reconciles the two. We identify users when you set up an account with us. We only ask for first name, last name, and a mobile phone number. However, we're able to access this data, mobile data, through carriers, and identify that John Smith is in fact John Smith. And now John Smith, who is of age, can walk into a participating retailer and make a purchase legally and lawfully. On the other hand, for regulators, we want something that's both transparent and indelible, which is a very difficult thing to do. In fact, FinCEN, when FinCEN came out with its guidance, they essentially came out and said, look, banks, here's the guidance, here's a laundry list of things you can do, but guess what? You won't be able to comply because it's nearly impossible to trace every penny of the transaction. With Tokken, you can. We, A, look at electronic transactions, and B, we use the blockchain. We're not a Bitcoin company, but we use the blockchain as the backbone.
And tell me, I have no idea what the blockchain is, but I'm very curious now.
Sure. It's. I think I wish I had a PhD in applied mathematics so I can explain how the blockchain works. But the blockchain, at the end of the day, conceptually, is a ledger. It's a ledger that powers Bitcoin transactions, and there are a number of distributed ledgers, if you will. Ethereum's one of them, and quite a few others. So what it does, it allows us. The blockchain allows us to record data on this public ledger with a level of encryption so complex that it's virtually impossible to crack. A good analogy would be putting data in a vault with the vault that's transparent that everyone can see. However, with the number of combinations that exceed the grains of sand in the world. So it's nearly impossible to crack that vault. But being public, it creates this little privacy concern. John Smith may not want the world to see that they bought, X amount of weed, right?
Sure.
So what we do is we actually hash the data. We salt it and hash its encryption methodology. And then we record the little mathematical number that represents the internal data inside of the blockchain block. And it attaches to another block, and that's why they call it the blockchain.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so what that does for regulators, it creates data integrity. So if a dispensary that uses us to get audited, for instance, or a law enforcement agency wants to look into certain activities and ensure that they're in fact lawful, they can we can grant them access to our internal system, and they can certainly look at every transaction and then reconcile those transactions against a public ledger and say, look, this is a transaction, this is the qualitative data, John Smith bought, whatever, and this is the mathematical hash that represents this transaction, and there's a corresponding hash on the blockchain. And that's how it creates a data integrity.
So Tokken, how close are you guys to launching? Where are you at in the process?
We did a soft launch with a couple of partners last week. Well, we essentially in a beta
last
state.
week?
Just
Wow.
last week, brand new. We've been working on this project for quite some time. In any case, by the end of this month, we'll have our pilot in place. We're hoping to run this pilot for 2 months and then go Colorado-wide and then nationwide.